Good evening. I am Guillermo de Cervantes of the Kingdom of Trimaris. This is a very special opportunity to learn about the game of Artsai. And tonight I'm working with Honorable Lord Frosty. Could you please introduce yourself?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for inviting me in tonight. It's always a privilege to be invited to speak. My name's Meginbjörn Frosti. Can't talk tonight already. Meginbjörn Frosti, from the Barony of Oldenfeld, the north part of Trimaris. I have been involved in Artsai for about 10 years now. It is one of my passions in the game. It's one of the things I kind of live for. As far as my own personal art focus, I've pretty much do just about anything I can get my hands on. But research is kind of where my heart lives. So getting the opportunity to come and speak to everybody about this portion of the game is really a privilege, because as I've been playing in the art side game, one of the things that I've talked to people about, and one of my roles as the baronial art side officer in Oldenfeld, is kind of enhancing people's ability to play the game. And I talk to people and I say, what keeps you from participating in art side? What are the obstacles? What can we do to kind of make it easier to play? And I hear horror stories, oh, I hear the judging is terrible, or I don't want to write a thesis. I don't, I've already written that one time, or I don't want to write a research paper. And I hear all the scary stories. And so part of what I like doing is removing those roadblocks for people and enhancing access to art side, showing that when you pull the blanket back, those monsters aren't so scary. And maybe when we take a look at things, it's not quite as bad as you think it is. And the rumors are just that, they're rumors. And if you've had a bad experience in the past, well, let's give it another try, and maybe we can approach it from a different angle, and enhance everybody's ability to play. So a lot of what I teach from is my own experience. Full disclaimer, some of the stuff I teach is from Trimaris, so it may be different in the kingdom where you are. And B, I'm not a Laurel. I am an apprentice, so I'm teaching a lot from my own experience, and I am hard-headed. I'm that guy who's going to challenge the norm. I'm going to ask the questions. I'm going to make the Laurels angry. So a lot of it is from my own trial and error, and my own running up against why we shouldn't do things that way. So kind of sharing the hard route, some of the stuff that I learned along the way. So having said that, I'd kind of like to lead in a little bit and share some screens with you guys as we start to explore.
While you're doing that, let me just make it clear. Our focus today is journeyman level Artsai.
Yep, absolutely.
There is another video we've done previously on the novice level, which is available. And in time we will do the master's level Artsai class as well. But today we're focusing on the journeyman level, and that's the focus of our discussion. We might touch on the novice, and we might touch on the master level just out of necessity for context. But to make it clear, this is where we're at, journeyman level today.
Absolutely. I see a hand up. We have a question.
Yeah, I was just wondering if you could define novice, journeyman, and master level within the context of this discussion.
Absolutely. That's, as a matter of fact, what the first thing I was going to do is here. I'm going to share my screen here, and we're going to go to our Trimaris art side page. And everybody see should be looking at the Trimaris.org officers page, yes? where it starts with step 2, choose your level at the top of the page. And you see here, it actually defines kind of better than I could, a description of what these levels are. So your novice, this is there. So let me say this, let me back up and say, there are 2 aspects that go into an art sci project. There is the art or science itself, and there's the documentation that accompany it. So you can be really, really good at an art, but maybe not so good at the documentation, or you could be super good at the documentation, maybe just learning an art. And the combination of those 2 factors are going to determine kind of where you fall in the hierarchy of where you're entering a project. Is a good example. Before I joined the SCA, I was a mundane brewer. And if you're familiar with the Mazer Cup, I won one. So I came into the SCA quite sure of myself because I had external validation that I was a brewer and I was good at it. So I walked into my first art side competition with quite a little bit of swagger because, here's, of course, I was going to win. Well, guess what? Sure, I was good in an art form, but I knew absolutely nothing about the documentation side and what makes a project in the art sci arena within the SCA. Needless to say, I was humbled very quickly because I knew nothing about the documentation that's required to make a good art sci project. So I learned about something that's called an ex post facto documentation project, which we'll talk about in a little bit. But my score was much, much worse than I had anticipated getting. Because I did not understand the documentation side of the game. I had made a good art project, but my documentation skills were not there. So that one wasn't quite, it's a good example of something that didn't quite fall where I thought it should have in the realm of scoring. So novice, you can see first time entrant, somebody that's new to the process or exploring a new art. So journeyman, this is our focus for today. This is where 99% of the art side projects are going to fall. So when you're figuring out what level you want to enter in, you need to ask yourself, what is your goal of entry? Is your goal of entry getting feedback on your new art? Is it you're wanting to go to Gulf Wars and compete? Are you looking to build your art sci portfolio to work toward Laurel? What's your goal here? And for most people, for their play in the art sci field, it's going to be here at this journeyman level. And you can read this here. It says for all standard level entries, this level will be considered the average level entry for art sci fair entries. It's geared toward most projects, requires solid research and documentation, an understanding of your topic and entry. And here's the key: does not require going above and beyond in all areas of the project. This is where that dividing line between here and masterwork is. That's one of the questions. Guillermo and I had a conversation about this the other night about where's that fine line between upper level journeyman work and master level. And right there is your dividing line. So can you go above and beyond? Well, you can, but it's not required for a journeyman. So that's where your dividing line there is. So this is where 90% of your projects are going to fall. Not everybody has to be a wizard, Harry.
So the novice level isn't as in the research that's required for novice level isn't as intense as you would expect from journeyman or master level.
Correct. And I'll click on this to show you. Again, I encourage you to take the novice level course. This is just going to be a reference to get us into where we're going. But this is the novice level documentation form. So at the basics, an art sci research is source of inspiration. What did you use to base your project on? What materials did you use in the project? Why did you choose them? What tools did you use in the project? How did you make it? What sources did you consult? Do you have any questions? So when you step up to the journeyman level, it builds off of this a little bit more. So instead of just this, now you start to build on this. You go, what materials did they use in your time period? What materials did you use? And if it's different, why? And it continues. What tools or equipment did they use? What tools and equipment did you use? And if it's different, why? What methods did they use? What methods did you use? And if it's different, why? So does it have to be identical all the way through? No. This is where we talk about it at journeyman level. We go back to this. It does not require going above and beyond in all areas of the project. So you can make compromises, and there are certain compromises that are not going to affect, not supposed to affect, your score in judging. One example is cost. There are certain things that are just cost prohibitive. And raw cost is not supposed to be a barrier for art sci projects. You can make an effort, but if things are just simply too expensive, they're too expensive. The other thing is legality, trying to make something out of ivory. If they used ivory in period, you're not going to be able to do it now. If things are toxic or poisonous, you probably don't want to put those in a consumable now, right? Especially not one that your judges are going to consume. So there are reasons for not making things the same way they did in period. But you need to explain why you made those compromises. And that may be part of the learning process. You may make a conscious compromise to do something differently than they did in period. But it's a conscious compromise. It's a reasoned choice. I did the research, and based on my research, I chose to make this differently than they did. You're not just swagging it. You're not just picking something out of the ether and going. At novice level, you can kind of get away with that. You can go, well, I went to Michael's and I got green gouache from the section because I liked it and it was a pretty color. At Journeyman, they're going to want a little more than that. I'm working on a project. This reminds me of a conversation that I had with my Laurel, where we were trying to figure out what a particular pigment was. And I was pretty sure it was silver leaf, and she wasn't quite sure. And I was able to turn the copy, the manuscript over, because I had a digitized copy. I was able to go over to the back of the page and look and see the damage that had been done on the back side of the page from it over time, and conclude that it was indeed silverleaf just based on the damage that was there. And my Laurel's like, hey, good job, you get a gold star for today. But that's stepping up to that next level. Where at a novice, not expected. Journeyman, you're starting to get toward that stuff that's building up to that higher level journeyman there. So the question becomes, if we don't have a novice form like this, how do we know what to put in our documentation? Because now's a good time to talk about the ex post facto project. Okay. Novice, you can get away with making projects because they're cool. I can see something that looks neat. I can make it with very little documentation. I can put it out there. It looks sort of period and it's close, and yay. When you start to get into journeyman, now you can start to compete for Gulf Wars. Now you can start to compete for higher level honors. now the bar has been raised a little bit. So now you have to start to be able to show the sources. Now you have to be able to start to document those things. So now it's not pick a cool project anymore. Now it's you have to do a little bit of research up front. Not everything makes a good art sci project. If you see a historical artifact, you're trolling through a museum and you see something in your art form and you think, wow, that looks really cool. You know, we got a really cool extant to work off of. But there's no documentation on it. There's no indication that you can find anywhere.
If you don't mind me
how it was-
asking, just because I sense that we have a very mixed audience tonight, what does extant mean?
So an extant is something that exists somewhere, an example in a museum, in a private collection somewhere that somebody could lay their hands on, that is an actual period artifact. My vintage Diet Coke or whatever bottle here, this thing. So if I were in person at the museum, then I could look at it and see. Unfortunately, a lot of times we are left with pictures online or other, you know, it's what's called a primary source. It's the object itself that we can draw from. So if you don't have a lot of information about how they made it or what they used to make it, maybe that doesn't make quite as good of an art sci project, because you're going to have to start making some guesses. And the more inferences that you have to make that are unsupported by any kind of evidence, the harder it's going to be to judge that project correctly. So maybe that thing is a cool thing to make, and it might fit in a category like SCA ambiance, but maybe that's not what you want to enter as your attempt at the Gulf Wars project.
So the question in the chat is, please explain the difference between a primary and secondary source.
Okay, so your primary sources are the objects themselves, firsthand descriptions, firsthand sources. Secondary sources are going to be the secondary descriptions. So the difference between seeing a painting yourself or reading about a description of the painting in a book. The secondary source is the reading about the description of the painting. So secondary source is usable, a primary source is preferable. So if I can go online and I can see a digitized version of the manuscript, that's as close as I can get to a lot of the stuff that I do, because I can't go in person overseas and see the manuscripts and lay my hands on them and take the measurements that I do to make stuff. So the digitized copy that they've made of the actual manuscript is a good primary source for me. When I start talking about the pigmentation and stuff like that, a lot of them haven't been through the chromatography yet, so I don't have the listing from the people that do the chromatography, so I don't know for sure if those are the pigments, but I have sources saying that these were the appropriate pigments that were used during this period of time, so I can draw the inference. Then that's where I start getting secondary sources in. Did that answer the question okay? So that period description, that falls into the secondary source. So since you're not witnessing it firsthand, that's still drawing the secondhand description.
Very good. So where would you suggest, if we're starting our research on a project, How do we get, we have an idea, we have an inspiration. Where do we go from there?
All right, so places that I like to use, a lot of it depends on what your art form's going to be. My art forms deal with a lot of physical objects. So what I like to do, I'll share a couple. I'm still sitting on my shared screen instead of my face, aren't I? So you guys are sitting here staring at my screen. Sorry. So you should be looking at the links pages at Larsdottir, right? This is a fabulous source for me for inspiration. You can search here, and this gives you a bunch of links. Like, sorry, my chat's right in the middle of. Let's take chess, for example. And this basically starts finding medieval and Renaissance board games and chess pieces. Some of it's post-period, some of it's going to be in period. And it starts giving you all sorts of different links. Some of it's relevant, some of it's not. Like this is kind of neat to me because I've just started learning blackwork embroidery. So I'm still at the very, very baby stages of blackwork embroidery. So I can start to look here, blackwork gallery. Okay, this gallery is intended to assist costumers. And so it starts laying out, okay, here's. And here's the primary source. St. Barbara, 1516. So woodcut. So then this tells us where it is, and we can start tracking down where this came from. And a lot of it is finding this stuff and then tracking back down to where it is in the museum right now.
If I could give an example, my current artsci project is an accordion calendar, a medieval accordion calendar. And and it was posted online by a professor as a possible artsci project for anybody that was interested, and I grabbed it up. I found that the calendar actually was in a museum in Copenhagen. And I was able to contact that museum, and they were able to assist me with measurements and descriptions. And they forwarded me a whole set of other pictures from other angles. And it was a very useful contact.
Now, you do have to be careful about that because I've angered the people at the Museum of London. I was working on a medieval tennis ball, and all the pictures that exist of this medieval tennis ball, I was making a copy of an extant and making it out of leather. And it was a project that I started back in 2015. And I had an unresolved question, and I entered this at masterwork level. Probably this is one of the projects that I probably should have entered at Journeyman just simply because of the lack of information on it. But I decided to enter it at masterwork because I have an ego that's pretty large. I have to tote it around in a wheelbarrow. So I decided to enter it at masterwork, and all the pictures were from like one of two angles, and I had one unresolved question about the pattern that I could never answer. And so I pestered and pestered and pestered and pestered the poor people at the Museum of London until right before COVID. The final answer I got from them is the ball is in deep storage. We are not getting it out. This will be our final communication. Thank you. So you do have to kind of be careful because you cannot, they are helpful. They are not of infinite patience. So yes.
And I imagine if you burn that museum, if you have future projects, they may not want to talk to you.
I sent them one more email, and I thanked them for being so very patient with me on my my labor of love.
But that's really only a starting place. Once we get, we contact the museum, we get everything we can from them, then we have to dig down into how was this project created in the first place.
Right. Let me show you a couple more examples here. I'm going to go back to my screen share here. A couple more that I pulled up. The V&A, Victoria and Albert. They have a lot of modern collections here, but they have a bunch of beautiful medieval stuff here. So manuscripts, this is a fabulous resource if you are like me. I'm an illumination artist primarily also. So this is a great place. If you want to dig for illuminations, you will get lost in here. In calligraphy, you will get lost in here forever. So, yeah, the V&A is great. If you're a leather worker and you want to go look at the Mary Rose Museum, great place to go digging around. You'll see a lot of neat stuff on the Mary Rose site. There's a pair of boots that I want to make off here pretty badly. Here's an example of a cool wooden cup that they found in the Mary Rose. Mary Rose is at the very tail end of period. It's in that gray area at the very end of period, but you can get away with making some of the stuff from there.
So these are good example of locations to find inspiration.
Yep.
But to do the research to be able to justify the work, like how was the ink made, you know?
So this starts to inform a lot of your stuff right here, because this gives us good information. Now the former crime scene and photographer in me is bothered by the angle, because this scale does not give us the proper angle on this to be able to tell the size, but such is life. It tells you about how wide it is, and they tell us here, look what they tell us right here: made of oak, poplar, and pine, lined internally with pitch, held about a pint. So we can start to draw some conclusions of what we need right there. This is starting to inform us of bits and pieces of our research. So before we even go any further about this, we've already started gathering just off of this, just off of the Mary Rose's own description of our primary source, because this item exists. It's extant in the museum, and we have our primary source picture of it. We've already gathered bits of information right there. So let me hop over to the Journeyman rubric, and I'm going to go to static. You see all the different rubrics that we have here. There are different ones for different arts. I'm primarily going to show you the static display tonight. Teaching, written works, research, performance. A lot of them have their own rubric because the art styles are so different. You
So
don't want to try
rubric
to
is
judge.
how it's judged. Rubric is, or the judging.
This is how it's judged. Yep. The judging criteria are going to inform us how to write our documentation at the higher level, rather than give us a form like you did at the novice level and say, hey, fill out this form. Now we're going to flip it around. We're going to build our documentation based on what we want the judges to see. Because here's the thing. Has anybody ever heard that, oh, I don't want to write a term paper, I don't want to write a thesis? So at your average judging, at least in the ones that I've had an opportunity to judge, we don't have time to read a thesis. We don't have time to delve into a work at that level of detail during your average arts and sciences fair. So you have to be able to digest the information that the artisan is presenting to you in that narrow window of time and score the sheet we're about to look at, maybe in an art that you're not even that familiar with. So the key to constructing this documentation is not to think of it like a term paper, because I don't have time to grade a term paper.
I have a few comments. One says many libraries have interlibrary loans with colleges where you can get some secondary sources.
True statement.
The question is a rubric consistent across kingdoms?
So the rubric consistent across kingdoms, I want to say no, it is not. I know Trimaris has our own, and we've developed and tinkered with it over the last several years a bunch. My Laurel's been primarily involved with that. I cannot speak to all the kingdoms. I've not seen the rubric for all the different kingdoms. I don't think it is. The interlibrary loan, yes, that's absolutely 100% true. The thing with interlibrary loan, it's kind of funny. There we go. Yep, can be quite different. Perfect. Interlibrary loan's great, but be aware some of these books that you can get into and research, they won't necessarily want to get for free because they're going to be expensive. So either you'll have to have a pretty good relationship with your library, or they might have to do a little negotiation. I've had them turn down interlibrary loans because they've gone, that book's just too expensive. On the other hand, my library's used to, when I come into the library in uniform, they know I'm there to pick up a book instead of do a walkthrough. So I'm going to hop back over to the rubric here. I'll jump into the Journeyman. So everyone can see the Trimaris 2019 Journeyman scoring form, correct? So in Trimaris, it's the expectation that you're going to have 3 copies of this form available to your judges with your presentation. If you don't have it out there, it's fine. The judges should have extra ones available. The important part right off the bat is you're going to see division and category. That's kind of important because we're going to need to know what to score you on. That makes a huge difference because if you think about it, if I make something out of leather, what category could I enter that in? Well, I could enter it in a lot of different categories. I could enter it in construction, and I've got divisions and categories here. This is the ones in Trimaris you can see here. Just scrolling down through some of them: dramatic performance, music, textile and needle arts. But I could go down here. I could enter in constructional leather. I could enter it into the tools that I use to make it. You could do the carving. You could do in leather arts, construction, molding, tooling, and embellishment. So every piece of what you use, if you think about book arts, in making a book object, how many different things could you enter that into? So you have to be succinct in what category you're entering for the judging. Title of entry, this is important also. If you're making a copy of an extant thing, make sure you know this is your iteration of this thing. If you're making your own something inspired by a period piece, then note that also. There's a difference to that. If you're making a copy of something that exists, when you're starting to get into Journeyman, especially when you get into Masterwork, it makes a huge difference. But in Journeyman, you want to start getting pretty close to the item that you're trying to make. Because if you're trying to produce the copy, they're going to start comparing it to the original. Where if you're drawing inspiration from a piece, then I want to see the synthesis. I want to see what you learned. So when we talk about calligraphy, for example, if you are doing a copy of a manuscript page, then I'm going to compare it to the original manuscript page, and I'm going to look and I'm going to see how your letters are structured. Are you using the same letter height? Are your letters structured the same? If not, I'm going to look at your piece and I'm going to say, what did you do to make this hand your own? You know, if you're drawing inspiration from this and you're doing synthesis, this is where you're starting to approach masterwork a little bit. What are you doing in this project to make it yours?
We have a question out. about choosing your category. You're really choosing your category when you're choosing your project. And as you're researching your project, by that, you've already chosen your category. The judges will be well versed, and usually a kingdom will try to find judges in your area of your craft to judge your work if they are available.
We hope so. A lot of that's luck of the draw. It depends on what you do. If you do illumination, chances are we're probably going to have a Laurel or a judge that does your art. If you do underwater basket weaving, maybe, maybe you'll get lucky. Guillermo does the wood burning. That's next level. The chances that I'm going to find somebody that knows it at his level, maybe not as high of a level, or not as high of a chance. But what I'm going to tell you as we get into this is that becomes your job when you're writing your documentation to prepare for this eventuality. This is why we don't write a term paper. This is why we use this rubric at starting at our journeyman level to prepare our judges, because that's what our job becomes now. In our documentation, our job becomes teachers. We're teaching our judges about this item that we've made. And we only have a couple minutes to do it, because in 15, 20 minutes, our judge is going to have this thing scored and go on to the next item. So now we have to teach them. If you're going to write a term paper, that's fine. Do it in indices, whatever you want to call it. An executive summary at the beginning of it that hits our points that we're going to make in this journeyman scoring form. So your judges can get the bites that they need. And then if they want the whole buffet, they can come back when they're done. Because then those bites will start to get their attention. And if it's something they really want to learn about, they can. I've got a project on illuminations I've been working on for literally 4 years. It's got a piece that I've done research on the knot work on it. That's probably 45, 50 pages worth of work at this point, of just individually analyzed knot work, because that's how I roll. No judge is going to want to see that at that in-depth level when they're trying to judge. So what I'm doing is I'm documenting for that. This is going into masterwork. I'm documenting my learning journey through this manuscript from start to finish. So what I'm going to do is I've got that set aside in its own binder. And it's there if the judges want to see my learning journey. So I'm going to have my documentation prepared primarily here. And I'm going to have pointers in my documentation saying, if you want to learn more about what my conclusions that I drew, look in index A in this binder. If you want to see more about how I came to this conclusion, look in index B in this binder.
Does
Some
it
guy
have-
from
Yep. Go ahead. Sorry.
Go ahead.
I apologize. I didn't realize I was not muted. My husband
Oh,
asked
no.
who are you listening to, and I started with some guy from Trimaris. Sorry about that.
Oh, that's okay. Hi, I'm some guy.
Yeah.
Nice to meet you. So let's look at the journeyman scoring form here, and we'll start to understand what I'm talking about a little bit. So when I'm the judge, I'm going to sit down at your project, and I'm going to take a minute and I'm going to look at your project. This is the way I do judging. It may differ with another judge, but this is kind of what I do. Before I even open your documentation, before I look at a single thing that you've done, I'm going to take a couple minutes and I'm going to sit there and I'm going to look at what it is you've shown me. And I'm going to take some time to just take it in, because maybe I know what this art is, maybe I don't. So I'm going to take a moment and I'm just going to, it's a palate cleanser for me. And I'm going to look at what you've put out there and I'm going to take it in and I'm going to look at the little details and I'm going to see what you've shown me. And then I'm going to let you teach me. So that's when I open your documentation and I take this judging form out. And these are literally, there's no surprises. This is what we're going to start checking off the points on. So we go step by step. Documentation. This tells you information about the completed item. What are we looking for? Does the documentation include adequate description and uses of appropriate materials, tools, and techniques? Has the entrant described materials, tools, and techniques used? What do you see repeated? Materials, tools, and techniques. Materials, tools, and techniques. So what sections do you think I have in my executive summary? Materials, tools, techniques. So my judge looks at it, they see materials. They used this. I used this. This is what's different. This is why. So they go, oh, okay.
So for the record, that's our mantra.
Yep.
This is what
That's
they used,
literally.
this is what I used, this is what's different and why.
And watch as we go through and you're going to see that rinse and repeat through this whole thing. So is the documentation well organized, legible, and relevant? Okay. Well organized. This is what we're talking about. Following that, if I can go through this and check everything off, you fed me. Okay. I didn't need the whole buffet. I could come back for it if I wanted it, but I didn't just get the whole thing out in front of me. You fed me the bites I needed to score it and go on. Legible. Can you handwrite it? Yeah. Should you? If you have to. In this day and age, if you need to, you need to. You know, if you're a calligrapher, some of those hands aren't legible. So I don't know that I would do mine in calligraphy. I'm just saying.
I always thought, excuse me, question.
Yeah.
I always thought legible follow the explanation easily. Is it it understand rather than typed first?
You're breaking up a little bit. But
Rather than
I
I'm
think I
sorry.
got the gist
I'll
of what
type the
you're
question.
asking.
Okay.
So I think you're asking about maybe the writing level as opposed to the legibility of the hand. Yeah, not assuming that your judges are all master scholars. You know, you're not going to dazzle people with your brilliance if you write at a level where they can't understand it. Yeah, clarity of writing, exactly. Writing it where it can be understood, because again, they only have a certain amount of time. One of the things, I write policy for a living, and we write it in an 8th grade level, and we write that way for a reason. Because when my guys need to read policy in a hurry, I don't want them to have to get out a dictionary to figure out what it is they need to do.
Keeping things simple and direct.
Yes. The old keep it simple, right? And relevant. You know, I love research, and it's hard not to run down a rabbit hole. And some of those rabbit holes would make great projects on their own, but not necessarily appropriate to discuss with it. Ooh, my screen popping up. Not necessarily appropriate to discuss within the bounds of that project that you're trying to put in front of the judge at this moment in time. Perfect discussion to have when they're done judging the project, or they're sitting there afterwards and they come up to you and say, hey, I want to talk to you about your project some more. Then you can run down those rabbit holes. Because one of the things that art sci can be used to do is answer questions and ask questions about your project that you may not have answers to. That is a criminally underused function of ArtSci is if you don't know the answer to something, using that as a platform to ask your judges questions. And then, are there conjectures made in the absence of documentation noted and rationale provided? So can you make leaps in judgment? Absolutely, but justify them. One of the projects, that manuscript I was talking about, I'm trying to show that they used a compass, the old-fashioned drawing compass. Difficult to do. Can't find one from that period. But what I did find was an unfinished illumination within the manuscript. And within that, I was able to show where there's circular arcs drawn, and right in the middle of that circular arc, there's a lead point. Seems like a pretty reasonable conclusion. Makes the arc just like it would for a compass. So I can make that conjecture in the absence of that tool pretty easily. So you see here, as all aspects, most aspects, some aspects, but you're missing important information, minimal documentation, or you missed it entirely. When we go down to documentation sources, did you cite sources and provide a bibliography? Cite your sources. If you used them, cite them. That's a hard rule. Always cite your sources. Primary sources, secondary sources, tertiary sources, cite them all. Give them all credit where you found it. Here's the key. Some judges actually will take the time to pull out their phone or pull out their tablet and check your internet sources. I have had that happen. If they are intrigued enough about where you got a conclusion, sometimes they will pull it out and check. Especially if you're at the upper level of Journeyman. Oh, this also. Judges can reclassify your project from different levels. So if they're looking at your Journeyman project and they're fairly sure this is a master level project, they can decide that we're going to score this at master level. So if they're thinking about making that decision, they might check your sources. So make sure you're documenting them appropriately. You don't want plagiarism, bad juju. So you can see here, same thing. And go down and check this. Check yourself on all this, because this is exactly what the judges are going to use to score. There's no secrets here. So make sure that everything's supported. Sources clearly support the research in the project. Documentation, information about the source of inspiration. Does the documentation identify the project to a stated time, geographic, cultural origin, show clear influence on the object in terms of design, materials, and application? So is what you made relevant to what you're showing us? You know, I found this manuscript I liked. The original manuscript is in Carolingian minuscule, but I decided to write it in Gothic Littera Bastarda. Okay, missing your relevance, but cool. I dig it. Not going to get you as many points. So looking at that stated time and geographic cultural origin, you're talking, several hundred years difference in the period of those two hands. You could have a huge geographical difference in those two hands. So why did you make that choice? So making sure that, here's the other thing, using post-period inspiration. If you're doing brewing is tough because most of our recipes come from very close or right after into that gray period. That's right after. I'm seeing some stuff. Let me go back. Fred and proofread. Pliny the Elder, right?
So a few people recommend that you have your project proofread before you take it to to
Yeah,
judged.
I'm going back in the chat. I just saw it pop up.
Mhm.
Scales are cool, but where does subjectivity come in? Subjectivity comes in a lot. You can get that one judge, and we all have, that just goes off the rails. However, in Trimaris, in our art side scoring, all of ours are reviewed by the person that's running, or the group of laurels that are running the tournament for our, especially for our Kingdom art side. If you get one that's way an outlier, they'll call in that judge, and they'll call in the group of judges and talk to them and compare and see, what did this judge see that the others didn't? Why is this score so much different than the others? And if it's bad enough outlier, then they may end up chucking that score. So there is some subjectivity, but you shouldn't really see scores that are that drastically far apart. Friend proofread, yes, 100%. Let's see. Persona grave reconstruction, where you don't make all the things yourself. Yes. So like somebody outside my house is blasting music. Cool. Yes, crediting people with source material. You also have to remember that not everybody in period made all the things themselves. So there's no expectation that you're going to make all the things.
Buying
some-
stuff was period.
Yeah. So there's no expectation you got to go, sheep to finished product. So, but crediting the people that made your stuff, 100%. Yes. So if I'm talking and I'm missing stuff in the chat, shout at me, because I don't want to miss good questions. These are great discussion. So, source of inspiration we talked about there. Post period, making sure stuff's in period is great. If you don't have anything else but post period and you got to roll with it, you got to roll with it. But try to keep it within period, because you'll start to creep down here in a little bit if you don't. All right, here's our big stuff. Authenticity, materials and ingredients. You notice that our points were only 5, 5, 5, but we get down here and all of a sudden 10s, right? So materials, ingredients used. Are the materials used in the project the same as those in period? Are they modern materials that closely resemble or replicate, or are they completely modern? Are the substitutions documented, and do they replicate the period product? Okay. Very similar. Substitutions mostly replicate. All substitutions are supported in the documentation. So our conclusion there is that you cannot substitute in a Journeyman project, correct? No, you can substitute. You can substitute a modern ingredient, but you have to justify why you made the substitution. So
Show that you know what was used.
yes, a reasoned, logical decision. There has, you have to justify why your choice was. Again, what did they use? What did you use? And why did you make that decision?
There's a question about time frames for source material. The question, I thought I saw somewhere on Trimaris website, we can use sources up to 1750.
1750. I haven't seen that. I can't rule it out. I could probably go hunt it up. I'd heard
I thought the
1650 was
cutoff
the end of
was
the gray period.
I thought the cutoff was 1650.
That's what I thought too. 1650 is always what I'd heard. 1750 is a little bit later than, 1650s. Yeah, that's what I was understood also was 1650. So we'll jump back over here to the, more chat.
Well, good
16,
example of the
15. Yep.
materials that you were talking about and how you don't have to make the materials.
Yep.
I did my project that I did with topography was a period topography with fire and cold iron rods. But I didn't make the rods and I didn't make the chest that I burned on. You know, I purchased the chest and I worked with a blacksmith at Gulfor who made the rods for me. And
Right on.
and in my research, I described that very frankly.
Yeah, there you go. And that's a period practice. You know, if I were a scribe in period, I'm not going to make all of my paper. I'm going to, or paper, use paper. I'm not going to make my parchment. I'm going to go buy it. I'm not going to make vellum. I'm going to go buy it. You know, I'm not going to make a lot of my pigments. I'm going to go buy it.
Would
I
you
have time
say
to
that
do all
that
I'm
would
gonna,
be a
I'm gonna
different?
grind it. I'm gonna mix it up, but I'm not going to farm lapis lazuli. You know,
Would you
I'm
say
not
that's
gonna
a
make my
difference?
journey to Afghanistan to find lapis.
Would you say
Um,
that's a difference between journeyman and masterwork? Is where you actually make the vellum?
Yeah, that's masterwork. We want to see the synthesis. We want to see that extra little bit of effort. Maybe you do the little bit more that you didn't have to do. Masterwork, we're looking for maybe making some of the tools that you use instead of, you know, where you might have bought them, we made them. Leatherworking, when I was doing my master level leatherworking, I made a lot of my own tools. I'm a horrible blacksmith, horrible. But I went and did some work, and I was gifted a couple of my tools, but you know, I put in some work and made some of mine also. Did I missed a question there that I saw hand raised?
No, I was just going to let you know that I asked that question about the persona reconstruction because I actually presented. I put in just an entry in A&S because I'm working on a persona, and what I got was somebody came up and feedback about the shoes. Oh, here's the documentation for the shoes, and of course I had the documentation, but I was very frank about I did not make these. And the person goes, oh, and then just walked away, even though there was clothing and other things that a couple of things had been made by me, but there were many things that are not, that I'm not a lamp worker. So that's why I asked that question, because I was really confused.
Yeah, I'm sorry I had that experience. You know, and I can't justify every experience that everybody's had in ArtSci. I had, of course, again, you're talking to the guy who carries his ego in a wheelbarrow and is contrary. This is why I'm never going to make Laurel. You know, I'm contrary just because I can be. I had a Laurel one time question the durability of that tennis ball that I was telling you about. So my response to that Laurel was going outside and throwing the tennis ball against pine trees for 2 hours just to prove that it was in fact durable. Not a way to endear yourself to the judges. I would not recommend doing that. If you ever want to make Laurel, just saying. But I also wouldn't write a 12-page rebuttal to their scoring, which I also did that day. But you know, here I am 10 years later, lesson learned. So hopefully you learn from my errors and don't make them yourself. But yeah, so moving on. Methods and tools used, same thing. Remember what we said at the beginning? What did we say all the way back up here at the beginning? Materials, tools, and techniques. Remember, we were going to live that like our mantra. Where are we down here at the bulk of our points? Materials, tools. There we are, right? Methods and tools right here, equipment. Are they the same as they were in period? Do they closely replicate them? If not, why? So there's our points. If we have already laid this out in the beginning, right here, we've already satisfied this part. So we nailed that down in our organization of our documentation right off the beginning. So we're already giving our judges those bites that they need to get this scored properly for us. So if they want the buffet, well, we got it in the indexes, right? So we're already feeding them. We're making it easy for them to score. And this is something in my line of work we say all the time when we have auditors that come in and they do our audits. It's about the psychology of an audit. If I make it miserable on my auditors, they're going to make it miserable on me, right? But if I can make it easy on them, if my files are in order and they can come in, they can do the audit, my policies are square, my proofs are square, they get in, they get out, everything's in order. Life's good. Your documentation's supposed to be the same way. If everything's in order, everything matches the rubric, this gives us our pathway right here. It lays it out for us, gives the judges the bites they need. They're in, they're out. If they want more, it's always there for them to get it.
So would you use the rubric as a kind of recipe for your paper?
100%. 100%. You can do whatever you want. It's your documentation. If you want to write it, if you really are. Now, I will say this. If you are bound and determined to write a research paper, well, you can do that. But there's a category for that. So enter it as a research paper. That you can do. You enter it 3 weeks early. They assign your judges to it 3 weeks early, so they have time to give it that due regard that it takes to judge a research paper. And they're not trying to sit there and judge it when they have 10 other projects. That they can do. So there is home for research within this. There, if you want to do that level of research as a journeyman, there is home for it. And again, I'm a research fanatic, so I say that with all the love in my heart. There's absolutely a home for that. But it's not fair to the judges to expect them to digest that in a narrow window of time in an arts and sciences competition. You think about the competition in terms of the fighters taking the field in a heavy fight or in a fencing tournament. They're not going to go out there and go, hey, it's my goal to draw this fight out as long as possible in the heat. Unless they're just Captain Stamina and they want to wear everybody out, which, Trimaris, I don't know. I grew up in Iowa. It's a different kind of heat up there, but in Trimaris, I ain't trying to draw a fight out. I'm trying to win and get it over with because I ain't trying to stay out in that humidity and heat for too long.
How long are your judging sessions?
When I judge projects, it depends on how many that we have, how many entries we have, how many judges we have. At the last Kingdom Arts side, there were plenty of judges. And unfortunately, not as many projects as I would have liked to have seen.
Okay, so there's not like a set amount of time. Okay.
Yeah, there's a cutoff where everything's done by, but they'll work till they're done.
So authenticity of the entry. Let's talk about that.
Yes. Again, methods and tools, are they the same as they are in period? Are there modern choices that closely resemble or replicate? Goes back to the same thing. Are you using the same thing in period as they did in period? If not, why not? Justify your choice. And overall authenticity. How closely does it resemble a period artifact? Is it the same style, the same elements? Here's the eye test. Does this look like it could be a period artifact? As it starts to look more modern, your points are going to start to come down. So you make a wooden chest, but you use obviously modern hinges and modern nails on it. You're probably going to start to lose some authenticity points there.
That's a good example because that would be perfectly okay for a novice level.
Yes. And it would be perfectly okay for a journeyman level, but it'd be a conscious compromise. Because
Which you
it's
have
like
to explain.
yeah, I'm not a blacksmith and I don't have a whole boatload of money. I'm a woodworker, but I'm not a blacksmith. So I didn't have access to the right type of hinges. I didn't have the money to spend to get a blacksmith to do it. So I made a conscious compromise to use more modern hinges on this. I'm going to lose some authenticity points, yes, but that's a conscious compromise that I made. So,
And that's described in the paper.
yep. So here's where skill starts to come in. Now, this is the most subjective part of it. The rest of it, fairly objective. Skill is always going to be subjective to a certain level. And this is where I have seen if they've assigned a judge to an area that's not familiar with it, but they know a judge somewhere is pretty familiar with that type or a little more familiar with that type of work, they might get somebody to go and say, hey, give me some, what do you think about this? I've had that happen to me before where I wasn't even judging that day. I was outside teaching or, chasing bubbles or whatever. And somebody said, hey, can you come give us some advice on this piece because you do this type of art? And there's nobody judging that does. So can you come advise us on this project? So I said, sure. I came inside and looked at it and I was like, stitching's good here, but this tooling right here is obviously made with a modern stamp. So I was able to give them a little bit of guidance on the piece that they had done. So the skill, the workmanship, this is going to be a little bit subjective because what makes the difference between a high level skill and a very high level of skill? Somebody in that art's going to know. That's just going to be time in the seat. That's going to be practice. Remember, Journeyman covers 90% of the art that we do in society. So you could be just a step above beginner and you're still developing your skill, or you could be just a hair away from taking that shot at a master's level project. This could be the project right before you do your big journey, life's work. I'm taking the moonshot. So this covers Journeyman covers a whole lot of ground. So, not everything is necessarily going to be a 10. This right here, to me, is the heart of Journeyman work. Because not everything's going to score a perfect score. This is where our growth as artisans happens right here. Because the rest of this is somewhat in our control, right? I mean, we can buy better materials sometimes, we can source better sources, we can do better research. But the growth as an artist, as an artisan, as a practitioner of whatever it is you're doing is right here. It's in the workmanship. Would you agree?
Absolutely.
So here, this is the heart to me, in my opinion. This is where you have the room to grow. So if I'm new in my art, I'm new in my journey, I'm entering the Journeyman level and I'm getting lower level scores here, I'm okay with this. I'm expecting that because I've still got room to grow in my journey. If I'm starting to nail higher level scores here, this is when I need to start thinking in my head, maybe I'm ready to take that step to masterwork. All right, complexity and synthesis. Okay. Complexity is something that I have some heartburn with, and I'm going to say some stuff here that is a little bit controversial. So, did the entry require work that a period artisan would not have needed to do? Simple projects can receive high complexity scores if the entrant authentically completes all steps involved or completes additional steps that a period artisan would not have needed to do. I do not like and me on record, I do not like the idea of needlessly complicating art side projects for the chasing of a couple points. Period artisans did things the way they did for a reason. We do things the way we do for a reason. And I don't like the concept of needlessly complicating things just to go, I made it harder. So this one to me is, when you look at what you're dealing with, the entrant used purchased prepared materials in place of most items a period artisan would have made themselves. Justification is not given for purchased items. I'll give you that one. Okay. Quills. All right. At a journeyman level, as a scribe, should I be making my own quills? Yeah, probably. Especially as I'm starting to move up through journeyman and I'm getting a little more familiar with my art, I should probably be putting the effort to learn how to make a quill pen. What about ink? Should I be making the effort to make my own ink? Yeah, probably. Does this extend to parchment? That's where we start to get to that question, because it is, to me, needlessly difficult to make vellum at a journeyman level. Can I do it? Yeah, but is it stupidly expensive and stupidly prohibitive for me to do so? Especially when a period artisan would have bought it. It's a judgment call. Is it worth 5 points to me? So the key to me is this right here. This line right here is the standout to me. No elements or materials were purchased that a period artisan would not have purchased. So the argument is, I don't have to make it more complicated than it had to be. I just have to show that I didn't take a shortcut. Does that make sense? This, I don't like this one, but there are laurels that can probably explain that argument a lot better than I can. That category has always caused me heartburn.
I have a few questions in the chat.
Okay, let me go back there. Yes. Yep. Complexity, yes. I dislike complexity a lot, and I'm not shy about that. my Laurel can tell you that we've had many conversations about my dislike of the complexity category. Especially as we get to masterwork, because me too, son. Good night. Okay.
I guess it's a question of, how deep down the rabbit hole you allow yourself to go. Do you have to go so deep that you get lost?
Well, and I think the caution that we have to be careful about with that is you become in a resource race then. If I have the money, if money were no object to me, right? And I could spend infinite amounts of money on having all the room and all the resources that I needed to make all these things, well, I could just do it then. But I live in reality where I got 3 kids, and if I got to choose whether to make them dinner or make vellum in my yard, and plus, to be quite honest, if I went out in my yard and started making vellum, the people at the apartment complex are probably going to get a little upset with me. They were already upset when I put a Pell out there. So, they're probably really going to get mad if I start making vellum in the yard. They might invite me to live someplace else. So, it's diminishing returns for 5 points. Got to ask yourself what it's worth. Synthesis. So synthesis, my mind has changed on this as my art side journey has lengthened. Because if I'm making a copy of an existing object, it is very difficult for me to show synthesis. Because all I'm doing is showing that I can duplicate an extant. I can show very high levels of skill, but it's almost impossible for me to show synthesis. But if I'm showing my own work based on something, now I can start to show synthesis because I'm showing what I learned from this. This is as I've started to come through Journeyman and start to produce masterwork level pieces in some of my arts, where I've started to understand where the synthesis points come in. And that's rather than doing a duplication of an artifact, showing a journey, showing this is what inspired me, but this is what I made from what I learned from that thing.
So
I didn't just go ahead, sir.
So if we have, if we have a original product that we're basically trying to replicate, but there are things about that original product that may be aesthetically displeasing. You know, maybe maybe the penmanship was poor. And we're able to show that we have the skill and the knowledge, but we diverge from the original project by using better penmanship. You know,
That's a perfect example. All of us, is there anybody in the chat tonight that can't write the English language? But all of us have different hands, right? All of us have distinct handwriting styles. And if all of us sat down and had time to write out a paragraph, had all day long to do it in our best hand, it might look one way. But if I had 30 seconds to scribble out a note, it's going to look like a serial killer wrote it with crayon. And who knows, that manuscript, well, manuscript's probably going to be, someone's paying a lot of money for that. So, you know, but maybe the scribe had a bad day. You ever seen some of the marginalia? Scribes have bad days. And you never know.
so this is what we do with what we've learned.
How did you make that hand yours?
Mm-hmm.
One of the hands that I was working on, there was a way that I learned to do the letter A. And I just didn't like the way that the scribe that I was looking at when I learned how to do the hand did the letter A. I changed it a little bit because it worked better with the way that I flowed when I did the hand. It was still very similar to the A that was constructed, but it was just a little different. But it became sort of a signature of the way that I wrote that particular, my Carolingian minuscule.
So it sounds like you're owning your path.
Yes. You could look at that page, and I knew that that was my handwriting already because I knew what my A looked like, and I could go, oh, I wrote that. I could see a scroll that was held up in court and know that that was one that I did the calligraphy on because I knew my handwriting. So that's where the synthesis comes in, is in your art. How do you make it yours? How do you own that? And it's kind of difficult to do when you're making a copy of an extant. So that's why you may lose some points on synthesis when even if your skill level is super high on something. But it doesn't show. See, and they even say it like right here, creation of a piece that replicates a period artifact with explained creative additions. So again, you took that period thing, but then what did you do to make it yours? So that's where synthesis starts to come in.
I have a good example of that. The chest that I worked on, The inspiration came from the inside lid of an Italian wedding chest, two-dimensional image that wowed me. But I'm working on, I was applying this image to a chest. And so the image was of 5 knights that were camped outside of Jerusalem. And I wrapped the image around the chest. So the middle knight was in the front of the chest, 2 knights were on the side, and the back knights on the left and right, they were sitting on the back to back. And so that's taking that original image and shaping it to meet my needs.
Yeah, I saw that piece. That was gorgeous. So the last piece is presentation. This matters a little bit because you want to display, you don't want to just chuck your item up on the table. You want to display it to the judges in such a way that it informs them, it draws them in, it catches their eye. Sometimes that's as nice as, you know, putting down a nice tablecloth and featuring it in a way that draws their eye in. A lot of this depends on what your item is.
And how much space you have.
What's that?
And how much space you have.
Coordinating with your art sci people ahead of time. One thing I've done before, this is a little risky, depends on how your kingdom looks at it. I've had one of those photo frames. You can do this with an iPad now. I'm dating myself by with photo frame, but iPad's probably a better choice now, where I've taken journey pictures. I've taken pictures where I did the Countess of Bolingbroke's white methogen mead. And I took progress pictures as I was making it, or I was using the egg as the hydrometer, and pictures as I was going through all the brewing process and everything all the way through. And I had them on there and I had them cycling through. So when I set up my display, I had that up there and I had the pictures cycling through. So my judges are sitting there and they're looking at it, and I have the thing out there, and I have the nice bottles sitting out there, and I have the glasses out there, and I have this photo frame sitting there, and then it's cycling through the project, showing them everything as it went through. It was a risk because it was almost like a museum display the way I set it up. But I had people come up and comment afterwards. They thought it was pretty cool. They're like, wow, that's really neat. It was a great idea. But I had power there, but I could also see how some judges might go, that is so obtrusively modern that really bothers me. So kind of rolling the dice. You could set this up. Countess Dulcia is the mistress, lord at, she and Sir Turld at displays. If you ever want to learn how to set up an eye-catching display, some of the Roman stuff they have done over the last couple of years has been breathtaking in how to set up a presentation display. And it has drawn people in, and they brought home the Gulf Wars grand champion a couple of years ago, if I'm not mistaken, on some of theirs. So bringing it in, making it organized, neat, eye-catching, presenting it like the learning opportunity for a judge that it is. And remember, that's all this is geared to.
I like the point that your process that you used, your art, your history, that might be an appendix. I had a book that showed the pictures of the evolution of crafting the project. That could be a separate book. Those are things that would support your paper that the judges are looking at.
Absolutely. And then the last thing that was there on the bottom was the extra 2 bonus points for using 75% or more period tools and materials in your project. Sometimes the judges will miss that. Period tools in the display with, yes, calligraphy place cards. Absolutely. I love doing that. I've done that when I made my ink. I even displayed the ingredients for the ink out there. So yeah, the display is great because it gives people an opportunity to see what you used. Be careful when you do that, especially if you leave stuff out there that is very valuable. Not that anybody in the SCA would take off with things that don't belong to them, but things sometimes will get misplaced or moved. If you walk away from your art side display and it's time to tear down and somebody moves your stuff, something valuable might go poof, and then, you know, you're out something super valuable. So I wouldn't put anything on your display that you would be super sad about if it didn't come back, other than, you know, the item itself.
So in summary,
Come play. Use the rubric to your advantage. That's your roadmap. Don't be afraid of getting a low score, because Journeyman covers everything from I'm just taking my baby steps outside of novice, all the way to I'm a peacock, you got to let me fly.
so in other words, use the art side process as a learning opportunity
Yes,
in our journey.
yes, come play. You know, this isn't, ArtSci is not a destination. This is an absolute journey. Enjoy it for the process that it is. I am amazed and astounded every ArtSci that I go to at the depth and breadth of talent that we have in the SCA, and it reminds me every time of why I play the game. And you know, thank you guys for allowing me to come and share my love of this with you.
Do we
If
have
there's
any
anything
questions
that I can,
before we officially sign off? Want to open the floor?
sure.
No questions. I just want to say the art side back in January was my very first event in my foray into art side, into SEA.
Wow.
And I was completely blown away with all I saw and all I experienced. And it not only motivated me to continue and to now be a member of SCA, but also my daughter who's with me and experienced it.
Welcome.
So
welcome.
yeah, huge kudos. Thank you. And huge thanks to everyone who shared, because that, I think that the sharing the education and sharing the experiences is what continues to allow our group to grow and allow newer generations to come in.
I love it.
You entered an art side project on your first event.
No. I attended. I did not.
Okay,
I
okay.
was gonna hey, you know,
Right. But no, it was my first
Full
SCA
send.
event to ever attend.
Okay.
So seeing the process, seeing what people had made, whether it was the different flavors of meat or things like that, really inspired me and gave me the want and desire to be part of this process and this group.
Welcome home.
Thank you.
ArtSci has always been one of my favorite events to go to. It's always a different vibe from the other events.
Yeah.
It's been like things have changed a bit. I mean, when we did SCA previously, it was about 20 years ago. So we're getting back into it. And I thank you very much for giving this class. I much appreciate it. Judging has changed and displays have changed a bit in 20 years. So it's nice to know what I'm going to need to do to do my first entry. Thank you.
You bet.
Actually, my friend Ed, you just inspired me for the fourth installment because we're doing the novice, journeyman, masterwork. I think the fourth installment for this series has to be on judging, and I think that's
a good idea.
That's its own discussion.
I
And
think that should be a panel.
yeah, that would be a round table.
I don't want to teach
discussion.
that one
I agree.
myself. That one should be a panel.
I agree.
Yeah,
We need to have some laurels
Whole
for that
different
one.
experience from entering. I again 20 years ago I helped judge metalwork stuff because that's my metalwork. But yeah, judging is a different animal from entering. There's some.
I
Yeah.
just want to.
Oh, I heard.
I would like to thank everybody. I'm going to stop recording now. Thank you, Honorable Lord Frosty. Am I pronouncing that right?
Yes.
for your participation and your support of our Kingdom Arts Center.
Absolutely. Thank you for the invite. It's been a
And thank
privilege.
you,
to-
everybody, for coming tonight.
you.
Thank you.